Hello and welcome to today's Explainer. So when most of us hear the word geography, we probably get a flashback to middle school, right? You know, memorizing capital cities, coloring in maps, trying to remember the names of mountain ranges. But today, we're going to completely flip that idea on its head. We are looking at geography through an entirely different, incredibly high-stakes lens: real estate. Because out there in the real world of property, development, and investment, geography isn't just a subject in a textbook, it is the ultimate decider of value. It's the difference between a multi-million-dollar asset and an undevelopable plot of dirt. Over the course of this explainer, we're going to explore exactly how the earth beneath our feet and the people walking around on top of it come together to dictate the price, the potential, and the literal future of every single parcel of land out there. It's a fascinating dynamic, so let's get right into it.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We've got 4 main stops. First, we're going to define the 2 lenses of geography. Second, we'll examine what we call the physical ceiling. Third, we'll look at the human floor. And finally, we are going to bring it all together in a concept called value in the gap.
Starting with Section 1, the 2 lenses, fusing the disciplines. Let's redefine exactly how we look at the world around us.
So the biggest mistake people make is thinking geography is just one monolithic, singular discipline. It's actually not. It is 2 very distinct, very different lenses looking at the exact same piece of land. Think of it like a pair of 3D glasses, right? You need both the red lens and the blue lens to actually see the picture pop out at you. First, you have physical geography. The core question here is, how does the Earth work? This lens is entirely focused on natural systems. We're talking about weather patterns, soil quality, water tables, fault lines, and topography. It's the raw, unedited planet. Then you have the other lens, human geography. And the core question here is, how do people organize space? This is all about human behavior. It's economics, it's migration patterns, it's culture, it's where we choose to build our highways and our homes. Now here is the absolute secret to real estate. If you are a professional evaluating a site, whether you're a developer, an investor, or an appraiser, you literally cannot just pick one of these lenses. You have to answer both of these fundamental questions simultaneously if you want to understand a property's true potential and its true risk.
Moving right along to Section 2, the physical ceiling, natural constraints. Let's look closely at the first half of our 50-50 logic.
Let's break this physical side down into 3 core pillars. You can think of these as the fundamental rules of the board game we're playing. First up, we have ecosystems. These are your forests, your wetlands, the coastal zones, the major watersheds. These aren't just pretty nature reserves. They set the strict biological and hydrological limits on how land can actually be used. If you mess with a watershed, the land fights back with floods. Second, we have rural land resources. This covers agricultural land and commercial forestry. In the context of real estate, rural land is basically the waiting room for urban expansion. It's the raw material that cities eventually consume as they grow outward. And third, we have urban land resources. This looks at the already built-up land and, more importantly, the physical constraints that dictate where a city can actually go next. We're talking about steep topographies, bedrock depth, or active fault lines. Together, these 3 physical pillars act as the ultimate ceiling. They dictate the maximum capacity of what a specific piece of land can physically handle.
To really make this concrete, let's look at how this plays out in the Philippine context, which is a perfect textbook example of these forces at work. Under ecosystems, think about the massive Laguna Lake watershed or the Pasig River. You can't just buy a plot of land there and start pouring concrete. You are immediately hit with strict environmental compliance certificates from the DNR. The ecosystem itself is legally and physically dictating your development timeline. For rural land, the Philippines has the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, or CARP. This acts as a massive legal and physical gatekeeper. Before agricultural land can be converted into a subdivision or an industrial park, it has to clear this immense hurdle. The rural classification literally guards the land. And for urban land, this is where it gets really fascinating. Metro Manila is rapidly running out of raw developable space, but it can't just expand in every direction equally. Severe flood risks in certain areas and the massive West Valley fault line running through others are actively forcing urban sprawl to move outward, specifically toward the Calabar Zone region to the south. Nature is literally steering the expansion of a megacity.
So if you take only one thing away from this half of the explainer, let it be this. Physical geography sets the ceiling on what land can do. Nature dictates the absolute, non-negotiable limits. It doesn't care about your budget, it doesn't care about your architectural vision, and it certainly doesn't care about human demand. You cannot build a massive heavy skyscraper on a sinking swamp without spending a fortune engineering around that physical ceiling. You cannot infinitely expand a city grid if a massive mountain range or a highly active earthquake fault line stands in the way. The physical environment is the uncompromising hard upper limit of all real estate development. It tells you what is physically possible. That brings us right to Section 3, the human floor, demand and development. We've seen the ceiling. Now let's pivot to the second half of our equation and explore how human behavior shapes these spaces. Just like the physical side, human geography has three core pillars of its own. First, we have population dynamics and health. This is all about demographics. Are populations growing or shrinking? What are the migration patterns? Are people moving from the country to the city? Tracking the movement of people is like having a crystal ball. It reshapes the demand for housing, hospitals, and retail centers years before a single real estate transaction ever takes place. Second is rural and urban development. This tracks the historical patterns and the future trajectories of how a country urbanizes. It asks why a city formed in a specific spot in the first place and how its infrastructure connects it to the rest of the country. And third, we have industry and global development. Listen, global capital doesn't just randomly fall out of the sky. It lands very specifically. It clusters where infrastructure, a skilled labor force, and government incentives all perfectly align. These three human pillars, where people go, how they build, and where they work, create the baseline demand for every single square meter of space on the planet.
Again, applying this directly to the Philippines paints a really clear picture. Look at the population pillar. Internal migration toward urban centers, combined with massive, consistent remittances from overseas Filipino workers, act as the primary, high-octane engine for housing demand across the entire country. That money flows back and literally builds homes. For the development pillar, we see something called primate city dominance, heavily influencing urban hubs, which we'll actually define in just a second because it's so critical. And for industry, just look at the massive business process outsourcing, or BPO clusters, in major business districts, alongside PEZA-registered ecozones. That is global supply chain capital physically landing in the country. And when it lands, what does it need? It needs millions of square meters of commercial office space. These human activities are the very engine that drives real estate forward.
Now, I mentioned primate city dominance, and this is a fascinating dynamic to wrap our heads around. By definition, a primate city is a settlement pattern where one single major urban center heavily outweighs all the other cities in a country combined. We're talking about dominance in terms of population density, political power, and total economic output. Metro Manila is the undisputed heavyweight champion of Philippine real estate. It acts like a giant magnet, pulling in talent, resources, and capital from all over the archipelago. Because of this human geography phenomenon, it is actually one of the most densely populated cities on planet Earth. But, as you can imagine, when a primate city gets that packed, the dynamics eventually have to shift, and that is exactly what we are starting to see happen right now.
As you can see here, while Metro Manila still holds this massive, overwhelming weight in the country's economic and real estate landscape, we are witnessing the rise of secondary hubs. Places like Cebu, Davos, and Clark are becoming incredibly vital counterweights. Think about it logically. As the primate city hits its physical constraints, remember that physical ceiling we just talked about? The traffic, the lack of space, the land values getting too high. Human demand naturally seeks a pressure release valve. It organically flows outward into these secondary hubs. As infrastructure like airports and highways improve, human geography redistributes itself, sparking the absolute next major waves of real estate valuation in these emerging cities.
Which leads us to this vital counter-concept to the ceiling. Human geography sets the floor on what land must do to meet demand. Without human intervention, without a population that needs shelter, without industries that need office space, without trade and remittances flowing through an economy, land is honestly just dirt. It's scenery. Human activity, human desire, and human economics are what create the baseline demand. That demand is the floor, and it is exactly what gives land its foundational financial value.
All right, let's bring it all together in our final section. Value in the gap, the integration point. Let's see what happens when we smash our two lenses together.
This is the big takeaway. Ultimately, value is created in the gap between the two. Picture it like a vice grip. From the top, you have the physical ceiling pushing down. These are the natural constraints, the flood risks, the fault lines, the protected wetlands that limit what you can build. From the bottom, you have the human floor pushing up. This is the massive population growth, the expanding BPO clusters, the insatiable demand for new housing and retail. Let's use a real-world example to show how tricky this gets. Imagine a parcel of land that is known to be flood-prone, but it happens to be located right next door to a highly lucrative, booming business district. The physical geography lens looks at that land and demands a massive discount on the price because of the inherent flood risk. You'd have to spend millions just to elevate the site. But the human geography lens looks at that exact same plot and demands a massive premium because of the incredible location, the foot traffic, and the economic activity right next door.
So what's the actual price? Does the demand premium outweigh the physical discount? Answering that highly specific, nuanced question is exactly how capital markets teams, developers, and investors price risk and determine true real estate value. They operate in the gap.
To really visualize this, imagine a hypothetical debate over a site acquisition. We take one specific address, the exact same piece of dirt. On one side of the boardroom table, you have Team Physical. They are looking at the site purely through natural constraints. They pull out topological maps and point out the poor, sandy soil quality. They highlight the uneven, sloping terrain that will cost a fortune to grade. They note its proximity to a protected river ecosystem, meaning strict environmental red tape. Because of all these development difficulties, they aggressively argue the asking price should be much, much lower. On the other side of the table, Team Human steps up. They are looking at that exact same dirt, but they argue the demand-side case. They pull out demographic charts showing a booming local population of young professionals. They point out the brand new highway infrastructure being built just a mile away and a nearby industrial park that's bringing in thousands of jobs. They argue that because of this insatiable human demand, the asking price should be sky high. So where does the deal actually close? The final transaction price is always negotiated right there in the middle. It is forged in the tension where Team Physical and Team Human collide.
So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. I want to give you an exercise that completely flips the script on everything we've just talked about. It's time to step outside your comfort zone and cross over into the other team's territory. Here is my challenge to you. For those of you who naturally lean toward the physical geography group, the ones who look at terrain and natural resources first, provide a city or place that was fundamentally shaped by its people rather than its environment. And for the human geography group, those of you who instinctively look at demographics and economics, provide a type of people shaped entirely by their physical surroundings. I want you to really think about how deeply intertwined these two lenses truly are. You literally cannot have one without the other. Until next time, I hope you keep looking at the ground beneath your feet just a little bit differently. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep learning.